Well, a very, very good morning to everyone joining us today. My name is Tommy Zyw, Director at the Scottish Gallery, and I'm delighted to be joined this morning by Patrick Elliot, Chief Curator of Modern and Contemporary at the National Galleries of Scotland. Patrick is a recognised expert on the work of Joan Eardley, and whose seminal exhibition, A Sense of Place, was hosted at the National Galleries back in 2016. His latest book, Joan Eardley, Land and Sea, A Life in Catterline, will, fingers crossed, be available shortly, hopefully from the 1st of September. Patrick, a very, very warm welcome to you.
Thanks for the invite, Tommy. Pleasure to be here.
Good. Before we travel up to the northeast coast of Scotland and to Catterline, I was wondering, Patrick, if you could tell us a little bit about your journey to this moment. I mentioned briefly the exhibition, A Sense of Place, but it'd be fantastic to know your journey your journey with Joan Eardley.
Well, a curator colleague at the gallery, Fiona Pearson, backed Eardley early on and did a tremendous show in 2007, I think. And then she retired a little later. And in 2016, it fell to me to do the exhibition, Joan Eardley, A Sense of Place. I'd catalogued her work and knew it well, but this was the first time I'd done some serious research on it. And the idea in that show was to split the exhibition and the catalogue that went with it, which I wrote in collaboration with Anne Galastro, into two halves, half about Townhead, half about Catterline. And really wanted to show how similar, paradoxically, both places are. I mean, one is overcrowded, poor area of Glasgow, the other windswept beaches in the northeast. But they've got a lot in common. And it was during the research for that, it always happens that as the nearer you get to an exhibition opening, the more you find. You meet someone who knows someone who knows someone, and stuff just starts rolling in. And this happened with the Joan Eardley show, which opened in December 16. Just in the few months before it opened, I found a lot out about Catterline, while it was quite difficult to find out anything more about Glasgow. So I probably ended up with about 5 times as much information on and unknown information as well, new information on the Catterline period compared to Glasgow. So rather than sort of overweighted in favour of Catterline, we just kept a lot of that information aside, with the idea that we'd do a publication specifically on Catterline at a later stage. And obviously the centenary was on the horizon, 5 years away. So 2021 was the date we intended to do it.
And I must say, I've been lucky enough to have a sneak peek at this publication on screen, and I must say, if anyone who's interested in Joan Eardley, anyone who's interested in the social history, this book is a must-have, and so you can pre-order your copy through the Scottish Gallery. Now, Patrick, I think so. You mentioned this rich new sources of information where you were in touch with in the lead up and maybe during the Sense of Place exhibition. And were these people who had actually known Joan Eardley during her time in Catterline?
Absolutely. The key meeting actually was it was in our lecture theatre. I nearly didn't go, but it was a play about Joan Eardley, a very good play. The lead character was an absolute dead ringer for Eardley. But it was one of these sort of testers. The audience were invited to comment. I think they read it out from scripts, and we were invited to make comments on it. And I could hear a chap behind me in this very musical voice, just politely saying that a couple of things maybe weren't quite right, and everyone looked round, and he then started talking in incredible detail about Catterline, about the people there. And as soon as the talk was over, I made a beeline for him. And he came into the gallery a few weeks later and I interviewed him. This was Ron Stephen, who was born in Catterline during the Second World War and knew Eardley. As a kid, he would sort of hang around her as she was painting on the easel. And above all, I mean, she wasn't a terribly sociable person, so there's a limited amount you'd get from her. You know, he wasn't tell me what kind of paints he used or anything, but he could paint a picture of the village. And the more you learned about the village, the more you realized how essential it was to Eardley and to her work. Just getting a picture of the other people in the village, what they did every day, how remote it was. It was quite far from the main road. Here's some pictures. I think this is one of about 1930. I've got some wonderful pictures from private collectors, mainly in the Catterline area. And that shows you where Catterline is sort of respective to Edinburgh and Glasgow. But all the neighbours and just how, you know, where people got their food, that kind of thing interests me. And then he could point to exactly where a lot of the paintings, you know, where she'd been standing. She mainly stood to do the paintings, looked over the top of the canvas or the board. So pictures which showed, you know, boats on the shore, you just thought that's Catterline Beach, or nets, there's the beach. There's specific bits of the beach where you'd get the boats. In fact, in that photograph there, you can see two boats pulled up to the left of the pier. If you see boats in a picture by Joan Eardley, they're always on that side of the pier. If you look on the right side of the pier, you can see there's rocks. There's no way you're going to get a boat up there. If you go to Catterline, I went to Catterline with Ron on several occasions. We've exchanged literally hundreds of emails and phone calls over the years. I went there and he pointed out the winch that's still there, actually. It's sort of cemented into the brae, into that hillside. So it's that winch that would bring those boats up onto the beach. And if they're high up, the chances are that it's autumn or winter. You've got a couple up there, and I think you've got a couple further down. And you can even, once you've sort of sorted all that out, figure out what the boats are called and who owned them and where those owners lived. So very often you'll find that it's the mascot, green boat, which I think belonged to the Watt family, and the Linfall, which belonged to a chap called Harry Wiley, who was in charge of the salmon fishing. He was the skipper of the salmon boat. They belong to them, and you can find out that they're in fact old lifeboats which have been decommissioned. And so it starts to sort of snowball from that. So Ron introduced me to Mr. Watt, who still lives there, and through other contacts I met and interviewed the old headmaster from Joe Simpson. His son kindly interviewed him and Mrs. Simpson for me. He's 100, and he was the first headmaster at the school when it opened in 1956. This is all gold for me. Trying to get some of the context around Eardley and why she'd want to live there, what appealed to her about it. Very quickly, you find out exactly why. Maybe have the next image. Here are some pictures which are in the book, in fact, showing Catterline around 1900. The top right, that's where she lived at the far end of that row, number 1. That's the pier, which was constructed in it was designed in 1838, 39 and built around that period. And a couple who lived in, Mr. and Mrs. Murray, who lived in the watch house, which is the first place that Eardley stayed in when she went to Catterline. Her friend Annette Soper, who was a teacher an art teacher in Aberdeen, bought the watchy on Eardley's advice. So why she wanted to live there, it was really an escape from Glasgow. I think Glasgow was quite difficult for her. It's strange that she never had an exhibition there. There was her show at the Glasgow School of Art, her diploma show. There was something tiny in a cinema, Cosmo Cinema. But she didn't have an exhibition in any of the art galleries there. And I found a lot of her letters as well. Luckily, a private collector let me see them. Incredible letters where she talks about how difficult it was in Glasgow for her. I think it was partly being a woman artist, partly being successful. She sold very well very early on, partly being English, middle class. You'll know Tommy James Morrison, the artist, who who also moved to Catterline. In fact, he moved and bought there slightly before. They were both sort of quite sensitive souls, and they both found Glasgow difficult. It was a period just after the war, quite macho, sort of it was pub dominated, quite hard drinking, hard socialist artists. And I think Eardley and Morrison both had a hard time there. So Catterline was a great outlet for her.
And Patrick, so I mean, Catterline, it's on the remote east coast of Scotland. Again, here's some more amazing archive photos of local life. What scene will have greeted Joan Eardley on her first visit there? It's a small community, and I mean, are they mostly fishermen? How would and also how do you think Joan was greeted as well by the people of Catterline?
Questions, Tommy.
Yeah.
In the 18th, early 19th century, it was primarily agricultural. The pier was built around in the 1830s, and that helped the emergence, strengthened the fishing industry there. But there were small boats, so it was a smaller port than Stonehaven. But by the 1870s and 1880s, there were over 1,000 people living in the parish of Catterline and neighbouring Kinneff. And there were about 100 fishermen around 1880. By 1920s, that had decreased to about 10 fishermen, and many of the young had left. They were using larger boats. The pier was really too small for those boats. Catterline was too far off the beaten track. It was just more expensive to get the fish to market. So it dwindled. And by the 1951, when she first went there, just on a trip with Annette Soper, just there by chance, really, it was half empty. Half the cottages were used as storage space for nets. Half of them have been abandoned. And the cottage that she took, it's the top right photograph you've got there of the South Road, that's cottages 1 to 10. She was at the far left. Hers was, there's a document about the rental values of these places, their worth. That had a rental value of £1 a year, while the coal shed, which you can see in the foreground actually, was £2 a year. Right. And it was at it was the most exposed end. It had no water. She'd have to go down a little path near the coal shed. That was where the tap was, the spring tap, with a bucket, take it back, stick a towel over it to stop insects and mice getting in. There was no electricity, even until the 80s. Electricity was put into her cottage in the early 80s. No gas. So it was pretty primitive conditions. Didn't even have a floor, it had a bare earth floor. She put a wooden strip floor in herself, in fact. So it was basic, but that's what she liked. And also she didn't have to, she liked the people there, partly because they didn't, they weren't sort of overbearing. They got on with their own thing. They were very sort of honest, genuine, sort of authentic people, a community, a tight-knit community, the kind that she loved in Townhead. You know, there it was kids, here it was fishermen and their families, but mainly older people, as we learned in Guy's talk with Anne the other day. Anne was very interesting about that she always got on well with older people. And there was a neighbour at number 7, Mrs. Taylor, who became a kind of mother figure to her. And I mentioned Joe Simpson, the headmaster. His son interviewed him for me. And apparently Joe was a little bit embarrassed that he'd never had a proper conversation with Joan. I don't know if he expected me to, you know, that he was going to come out with all sorts of tidbits about she did and that. But the fact that he'd lived there for three or 4 years and never had a conversation with her, you know, they would sort of smiled and nodded and stuff. Yeah. Talked about the weather. That said it all, that she could just get on with her life. She didn't have anyone hassling her, nothing to prove, got on with her own thing. Next picture, that's right.
And here we have Patrick. Well, obviously, this is an aerial map of Catterline. Could you just talk us through the buildings that you highlighted?
Yeah, the blue arrow that shows, that's Catterline is pretty much as it is. There's some new houses between those orange and blue arrows, but it's pretty much as it is. It's like going to a film set. It's extraordinary. So the blue one shows the Watchy. That's the old customs watch house, which she often used from 1952 to 54. Her friend Annette bought that. And then when Annette needed it more, she rented number 1, which I just spoke about, £1 a year. The red arrow at the bottom, very exposed, nearest the big lighthouse and foghorn. Then she bought, really on behalf of Angus Neal, her friend, Sarah's cottage, which is the orange one at the top. Didn't stay there long, it didn't have a sea view, and she ended up in the number 18, the green arrow at the bottom. I think we flip to the next one. What's quite interesting. Those arrows, sorry, that's a sort of bit nerdy, but it's quite interesting. Those arrows, the red ones are still showing where she lived. But what you see, if you try and, it's quite difficult. She didn't often date her works, but you can figure it out if you go through all the exhibitions that she was showing at. You can get a pretty good chronology. So she moves in, she doesn't paint the sea, by the way, until about the beach until about 1956, and the sea until about 1959, just when she moves into number 18. Mm-hmm. Down there, those yellow arrows, that's what she's doing in the late 50s. Those, the fields just behind number 1, just in front and behind it. And then when she moves to number 18, which is indicated with that big sort of blue arrow in front, that's when she starts doing those famous pictures of Catterline in winter. There's a whole series of them. And what's evident is that she's really painting almost literally outside her front door. In the early years, when she's up in the Watchy, that red arrow, she's painting mainly in that area, never at the sea. It's the back of those houses. It's as though she's been in Glasgow for X years and just can't get to grips with the sea. In fact, she says that in some letters. And I should say that she wrote masses of fabulous letters. So we can get almost a day-to-day, day-by-day account of what she was up to. So early on, she's in that area. When she moves to number 1, around 1954, she's painting that area. When she moves to number 18, very end of 1959, she moves in early 60, she starts to paint the sea, just these flat-on pictures of waves, and also those landscapes of which show the road, the South Road, which I think we'll see in a moment. I've just marked some of that star shows where she's doing all the nets over that side. The boats, which we'll see in a moment, I think, are where she's on where the green arrow is. You've got one in your show that. And the white arrow, that's where she's mainly doing the works that look straight out to sea, where you've got very little sort of bearing of rocks or anything. Mm-hmm. So I think if we move on. So it's all sort of time to her, we can just flip over that. That's those are the ones she's doing early on when she moves into Catterline, 52, 53, 54. All the buildings, you know, she comes from Glasgow, the tenements of Glasgow, and she paints the buildings. She just can't bring herself to do the sea. Go to the next one. I've got lots of lovely photographs, thanks to the kindness of people in the Catterline area, wonderful ones. These are the people that she was talking to, exchanging words about weather and whether the winds were coming. She was very keen on she had listened to the long-range weather forecasts. You know, if storms were whipping out, these people would tell her. And she'd come back to over from Glasgow at a moment's notice. It only took about 3 hours on the train. And then a bus ride or her moped. And that's the salmon fishing. There's all kinds of, we can't go into that now, but there's all kinds of fishing that goes on. All the nets you see in her pictures, they're salmon nets, a particular kind of salmon net that was peculiar to that area of the east coast of Scotland. But these people own those boats. Harry Wiley, who's in there, he owned the blue boat, the Linfall, I think, which you'll see in many of those paintings. It's lovely just to be able to sort of trace some of the history of these people. And yeah, she would have had, you know, regular words with these guys. They were her neighbours. If we go to the next. During the first show at the Sense of Place one of the revelations is that when you organise a show, often you try to see as many of the pictures as possible. Sometimes it's not possible, you know, sometimes they're on a wall in a museum or in someone's house. But with Eardley, you'll see the sort of clue to what I'm saying. That's a piece of metal at the bottom. That's a picture wire. Loads of the pictures have got pictures on the back. And it's only when you're unwrapping them, when you hang them, you see all these pictures. There's loads of them. I would say at least half of Eardley's paintings have something on the back. She just used anything that was to hand. If she didn't have material, she would just paint over or paint on the back, often upside down. The same with paper. She just used any paper. I found this marvelous letter where she wrote it on. She was on a train, didn't have any paper, and used British Rail toilet paper. And it's about 20 sheets of that shiny stuff that anyone over about 45 might remember. So this is, you know, these are very, very rare, these early Catterline paintings. And here's one, this Upturned Boat, which was used as a kind of shed by Mr. Stephen at number 8. And it was used by the kids in the area as a sort of play area, hiding place. And you can see actually number 18 in the distance there, the house where she'd end up. Loads of the pictures have these in the back. Next one. The nets, those are salmon nets. A very unusual instance actually of, quite unusual, of her using a photograph, which has been made into a composite to base a painting on. Later on, she wasn't doing that, not in her painting. But these are salmon nets. One of the lucky breaks I had was meeting Jonathan Stansfeld, who had been in charge of all the salmon fishing on the East Coast from the late 50s through to about 2000 for Johnson and Sons, a Montrose firm. And he did everything. He sort of arranged for the boat, for the salmon cobble to head up from Montrose every February. For these stakes, they're larch poles. They all came from the Athol forest, Perthshire, about 5-6 meters tall. They would go up in February and they would stay up until August. Mm-hmm. And he had all his logbooks about how much all the fishermen paid and everything. And could tell me, for example, that there's two kinds of nets that go out with salmon, the long nets and these bag nets. There you're seeing both actually. The long nets had to be taken out by law at the weekend, so you can overfish. And the bag nets, they'd clean and mend every second week. So if you see the nets and the bag nets, you're seeing the bag nets behind. That's looking back towards number 1. Mm-hmm. Left. And the tree that's in your picture, by the way, at the very left. That has to be at a weekend every second. That's a fortnightly occurrence. You get the bag nets up like that. And that'll be a weekend. It'll be a Saturday or Sunday. I thought that was interesting. Yeah. So it's quite rare. It's quite a rare thing. Maybe that's why. And she talks once about seeing the bag nets up and rushing out to paint them. Because also the weather has to be right. You know, if it's nice and sunny, she's not that interested.
No.
Next. That's your picture, Tommy.
That's right. Yeah.
Fabulous thing. That's the pier. You're seeing the water come over the pier. Mm-hmm. That's my photograph I took up when I went up once. So you're on the west side of the pier, a pier that's too small for, you know, regular fishing boats by the 50s and 60s. Water coming over it. That's the Kale Tap. That's the boat shed where they kept the lifeboat on the left.
And obviously, Catterline, it does have these distinctive features which she often uses in her composition, like the Kale Tap. Do you just want to mention these features? And I know, Patrick, that there's the Kale Tap, but there's also this Todd Head Lighthouse again appears in a number of her pictures as well, and often anchors the composition in what would have otherwise be quite a wild.
Yeah. The boat shed, the salmon bothy. You're seeing actually there's tiny, just by the boat shed, you'll see tiny little bits of blue and red. Those red and blue. Those are the green rather. Those are the boats. So it's the boats, the pier, the Kale Tap, the boat shed, the salmon bothy, the lighthouse, and the cottages. The watchy is often visible in the far distance, and number 1 is visible in the far distance. So she was painting a very small area around Catterline. It's barely 10 minutes walk from one end to the other. But one interesting thing is she did actually yearn to go elsewhere. It was partly practical in that she was carrying these big boards around and couldn't take them that far. But also she yearned to drive. She talks about wanting to visit other villages up the coast and down the coast, but never learned to drive. And she had a little moped, so she could go sketching out in the country and take small paintings out there, but couldn't take the large ones that were really her lifeblood in the last years out much. I think had she lived longer, she would have learned to drive. She often speaks about this, wanting a van, so she could sort of visit nearby places.
And Lise, would you mind just moving on to the next slide, please?
That's the Linfall, and that's again the water coming over. I think this is in Dundee Uni. This picture. That's water coming over the pier. With, in fact, those are 2 of the fishermen in the foreground. It's probably Harry Wiley in the far distance.
And I love that mention in your book, Patrick. There's a famous painting. I believe it might even be in your collection, or which has this 2 streaks of yellow, which is just want to mention that discovery.
I can't remember what that is, Tommy. Tell me.
It was, I believe, again, it's
yes. Yeah, absolutely. I've got you wrong. Those are Mr. Watt's waterproof trousers. Yeah. It was a sort of yellow blob next to a boat, and the picture had been in our collection. Lisa can move on it had been in our collection for nearly 50 years. And then it was Ron Stephen who came along for the opening and said, that's Mr. Watt. And then what? Because it's his boat. It's the green mascot, and he's tending to it. And those are his yellow waterproofs. That is probably, by the way, this is the Wave. There's 2 different views on this one, but that could well be water coming over the pier again, and that's the Pier Craig, the sort of mound, sort of rocky mound in the foreground. So from the same kind of view. Next one. Yeah, so you do occasionally get folk in the back of the pictures, but it's very much that the boats, the nets, the crab creoles and so on, they stand for the people. It's very much they stand for the community. Mm-hmm. Catterline was absolutely essential to everything that she was doing in these later years, and that's why I wanted to give some history to the people who lived there. I think they were very important for her work.
Lise, just the next slide, please, Lise.
That's when she's looking out straight to the sea, and that's the I think in my screen at least the lighthouse is slightly obscured by us, but she's looking straight out there, and she's not on the beach actually. This is another thing that Ron pointed out. Just by the boat shed, there's a sort of scrap of concrete, which is where a fish smoking ship was, and by the 1950s it was had fallen down completely. But you could see some of the stones that it was constructed out of, actually, if you look carefully on the beach. So it was on that little bit of concrete that she was often painting, and you can see that it's actually quite difficult to paint on a stony beach. Down and stuff. If you look at that last picture, in fact, she's on that stretch of concrete, and she could also get her moped, her Lambretta down that little road there. Yeah, you can see she's on a bit of concrete. She's put some sort of plastic sheeting or whatever down, and that's where she can get her moped. And that's the spot where a lot of these paintings, just of the bubbling, frothing sea and waves, were done in these very late years. They're all late pictures. That picture belonged to Naomi Mitchison. You can see that she cut it down, actually. It's bigger when it's on her easel. Always kept very low, so she could look over the top of it. Painted very, very quickly, as I think it was Guy Oran said in the last one. She was like an impressionist expressionist. She had to do these paintings quickly before the light changed, before the wind changed, and she might have half a dozen works on the go at any one time. If the light changed, the sun went in, wind picked up, the waves wouldn't be the same. And she was above all a realist, and she'd have to stop and then go on to the next one. But that's partly why these are painted with such sort of bravado and gesture, but that she was trying to do them quick before things changed.
And it's interesting, Patrick. I mean, I think perhaps a few people joining us will be surprised that Eardley's, on her arrival to Catterline, did not instantly engage with this, with the sea. She was first of all painting the architecture of Catterline in a similar format to some of her Glasgow scenes. At what stage did she? Because at that stage, I believe that she was mostly working in the studio, maybe fact gathering with sketching outside, but working predominantly in the studio. And at what stage do you think she made that leap? She made that leap from working in the studio to engaging with her subject, surrounded by her subject.
Another great question. How much time have we got? Early on, she's making. Well, early on in the early 50s, she's more in Glasgow than she is in Catterline. And as the years pass, she spends more time in Catterline. So by the end of it, she's living in Catterline and giving out her address. She's bought a place there, and she's making trips to Glasgow, whereas early on it's the other way around. In Glasgow, she's painting on canvas. In Catterline, it's on board. It's easy to carry around, easy to buy, easier to store and so on. It's more robust. In the early 50s, she's mainly working on drawings, and she does that in Glasgow as well. I mean, these pictures of kids out in the streets, they're not done outside. She'd never have got peace and quiet. They're done from photographs, sketches outside, and then the kids pose indoors in the studio. These works, the end, they're all done outside. There's a few, as we know, flower paintings which were being done when the weather was just too bad or she wasn't well or something. But there's a shift towards working outdoors and right outside her studio. So those two paintings that we're seeing there, the one on the bottom left belongs to Birmingham. That was done almost outside her door. That's her washing. That's her knickers and stuff just hanging out. And just on the right, that's and you can tell it's sort of, the one on the left is probably about 2 in the afternoon. The one on the right is probably about 4 or something. By that time, that's the sun going down. It's getting dark. It's getting cold. Both winter pictures.
Yeah, and I love that revelation as well, Patrick, in the book, that the South Row didn't have any letterboxes.
No, because they was blown in. Well, the door blew in often. It was held together on string. There's some very funny letters which are in the book which weren't published, to do with her dealer from London, Lillian Browse, of the very high posh end Del Banco, Roland Browse Del Banco gallery in Cork Street, Mayfair. And she came up in her finery and her patent leather shoes and so on, and was sort of dodging in and out of the goat droppings and so on. I can't remember why I started that story, but there's some tremendous stories. I haven't really spoke of this incredible hoard of letters to her lover, her last lover, at the end of her life, which they're exchanging almost on a daily basis. And she's talking about these things.
I think we have a photo, Lisa. If you could maybe find a photo of...
Yeah, Lil Nielsen. It's the very last one. There she is. A love affair. She knew her as a student in 1960, but got to know her better in in the autumn of '62, but died in August '63. So it was comparatively brief. But Joan Nielsen lived in Canterbury, and they exchanged letters. I mean, sometimes 2 or 3 a day.
Wow.
Much of them about the just daily basic things, what they ate and how much they missed each other and this kind of thing. Never about paint technique. It's always about dealers wanting, people like you, Tommy, dealers wanting more work from them and not wanting to sell. It was quite funny. I mean, Eardley would have been quite happy. She said this, I think it was partly a joke, but she didn't really want to sell things. The more she sold, the more people wanted. She wasn't an undiscovered artist by any means. She sold very, very well, and it started getting our nerves that more dealers wanted more work from her to sort of keep the whole treadmill going. And she thought it would be a good idea if she just stopped selling, and her quality of life would improve. Sorry, Tom.
That's fine, Patrick. Now, I realise we're now pushing the time limit, so I'm afraid we'll have to wrap up soon. I'm sure we could all. I'd be happy chatting about this all day. But Catterline was changing whilst Eardley was even there. Patrick, you've mentioned that the school was built. And there were developments happening, and it's a community which I'm sure people who will have visited Catterline still have that wow factor of reaching the edge of the cliff and looking down to this wonderful crescent bay. I'm just wondering, Patrick, would you just like to mention Eardley's the legacy that Eardley has left for the people of Catterline?
That's an interesting one. I think every one of them will have immense pride in what Eardley did there. They'll have pride sort of in Eardley and also pride in the village. I think the village transformed Eardley. It was partly the sea, but it provided her with a subject, a constantly changing subject. The crops which changed, the weather that changed, the light that changed all year round. It was constantly changing, so they're hugely proud of her. I think there's a number there who wouldn't want it to become a kind of a goldfish bowl where people were always sort of looking through windows and so on. But I've never found any animosity. I think the one thing you get there is utter sheer pride in being connected to this place, which it's as important as St. Ives in the history of British art, and yet it's still quite unknown. It's partly unknown because it takes a bit of effort to get up there. But boy, is it worth going there! It's like, as I say, entering a stage set. You can see exactly where she was when she was painting all these things.
Patrick, thank you so much for your time today. I've really enjoyed hearing from you. We're all very, very excited about the new publication when it comes out, and also we must mention the exhibition also at the National Galleries.
Totally, yeah. There's a lovely show on, which was organised by my colleague Lila Risco. Yeah,
and so that's on our exhibition. Our centenary exhibition is on until the 28th of the month. So I'd be delighted to see you in the gallery, because there's nothing like seeing these works in the flesh. To get up close to Eardley's work. Patrick, thank you once again, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Cheers, Tommy.
Bye.